Traditional retirement planning has always asked the wrong question. For decades, we've been told to ask, how much money do I need to retire? What's your number? That is not the best question. After helping hundreds of people prepare for retirement over more than 3 decades, I've come to believe there is a much better question. Not how much have I saved, but can my income support the retirement I actually want to live? Those are two very different questions. Because everyone can retire, but at what income? That is what we will explore in today's video. Thanks for joining me. This is the Financial Fast Lane, and I am Lane Martinson. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, Lane, do I have enough to retire? And the honest answer is, it depends. It depends on the lifestyle that you want. It depends on where you live. It depends on your health. And it depends on how much you plan to travel or maybe buy that vacation home that you've always dreamed about. Every retirement looks different, and that's exactly why there isn't one magical retirement number. But let's look at some averages. As a disclaimer, you have to be very careful when you're looking at averages because averages don't tell the whole story and they can be misleading. But at the same time, averages can give us a starting point for a discussion. According to the latest federal data, the average American age 65 and older spends just over $5,100 per month, which is about $61,000 per year. Now, for some of you, that's lower than you're expecting. For others, it's nowhere near enough. And that's the point. The average doesn't tell you what your retirement will cost. It simply gives you a place to start because retirement isn't about living the average life. Right? It's about living your life. Here's where I see many people struggle. Throughout your many working years, you're focused on saving, contributing to your 401k, maxing out your IRA, building your investment accounts, and that's important. But something interesting happens when retirement finally arrives. Saving is no longer your primary focus. You now have a different challenge. You have to turn those savings into income, and those are two completely different skills. Think about it this way. Imagine two people. Both retire on the same day. Both have exactly $1 million. From the outside, they appear identical, but one has a carefully designed, tax-efficient income strategy. The other simply plans to withdraw money whenever they need it. 10 years, 15, 20 years later, those two retirements look nothing alike. Because retirement isn't determined by how much money you start with. It is determined by how well your money supports your life. For years, when I have been asked the question, Lane, can I retire? I often say, everyone can retire, but at what income? That is the real question. Retirement isn't the finish line. In many ways, it's the starting line. For the first time in your adult life, your paycheck may stop, but your expenses don't. Your electric bill still arrives. Your property taxes still come due. Your insurance premiums still have to be paid. You still buy groceries. You still fill up your car. You still replace appliances. You still pay for health care. Your life doesn't become free just because you retire. In fact, for many people, they finally have the time to enjoy life. They travel more. They eat out more. They visit family more often, which means retirement can actually be more expensive than expected. It's great to have assets, but assets without a good income plan is a stressful way to live. It always comes down to the income and after-tax spending. Because until you know what kind of retirement lifestyle you want, it's impossible to know how much income you'll actually need. And that's what we're going to look at together. So let's break down where retirees are actually spending their money, and more importantly, what those numbers really mean. Let's begin with one of the largest expenses for most retirees, housing. According to the latest government data, retirees spend nearly $1,850 every month on housing. And that surprises a lot of people. They'll often say, Lane, I thought housing costs would go way down once I retired. Sometimes they do, but often they don't. Even if you've paid off your mortgage, you still have property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, maintenance, repairs, and maybe HOA dues, and of course, landscaping. And if you've owned a home for any length of time, you already know houses have a way of reminding you who's really in charge. 1 year it's a new roof, the next year it's the air conditioning unit, then it's plumbing or windows or the water heater. The list never seems to end. One of the biggest misconceptions I see is people assuming that paying off the mortgage means housing becomes inexpensive. It certainly becomes less expensive, but rarely inexpensive. A home continues to require attention and money. That's why housing remains the largest retirement expense for many Americans. Now, some people downsize, others don't. Some move closer to family. Some move across the country. Others decide they love their home and they never want to leave. There is no universal right answer. The right decision is the one that supports your retirement goals. And it's about creating the life that you want to live. The second largest expense is transportation. The average retiree spends nearly $800 every month getting from one place to another. Now, at first, that sounds high. After all, you're no longer commuting to work every day. But transportation is much more than gasoline. It's insurance, maintenance, repairs, registration, tires, oil changes, and eventually another vehicle. One mistake I see people make is, forgetting that retirement may last 30 years. Think about that. If you're retiring at age 65, there's a very good chance you'll still be driving 20 years from now, maybe longer, which means you'll probably replace your vehicle more than once during your retirement. At each replacement, it will likely cost more than the last. And those aren't monthly expenses, right? They're large, irregular expenses that quietly show up every several years. A good retirement plan prepares for those expenses before they arrive, not after. The third major category is food. The average retiree spends more than $650 every month on groceries and dining out. Now, some people assume they'll spend less on food once they retire, and sometimes that's true. But many retirees discover the opposite. For the first time in decades, they actually have time to meet friends for lunch, times to take the family out to dinner, time to travel, time to enjoy the little things that work used to crowd out. I've had many retirees tell me, Lane, we actually eat out more now than we did when we were working. And that's okay, because you've spent your entire career preparing for this stage of life. Retirement shouldn't feel like a punishment. The goal isn't to spend as little as possible. The goal is to spend intentionally, and there is a big difference. If sharing dinner with your grandchildren every Friday night brings you joy, that's not just another expense, that's part of the retirement that you worked so hard to create. Now, let's talk about the expense that concerns almost everyone, healthcare. On average, retirees spend roughly $650 every month on healthcare. But here's the challenge. Healthcare isn't predictable. Some years you may spend very little. Other years, everything seems to happen at once. Maybe it's hearing aids, a knee replacement, dental implant, vision care, prescription medications, or something completely unexpected. Healthcare has a way of reminding us that life doesn't always follow our plans. And that's exactly why your retirement plan needs to be flexible or have flexibility. One thing I've noticed over the years, people often spend far more time worrying about the next stock market correction than they do about preparing for healthcare costs. Yet for many retirees, healthcare taxes become the larger financial challenge. Not because they failed to plan, but because healthcare expenses don't arrive on a predictable schedule, which means your retirement income needs room to absorb those surprises. Now here's something I'd like you to notice. We've only talked about 4 categories: housing, transportation, food, healthcare. And together, they account for the majority of what most retirees spend every month. But here's what's interesting. Those aren't usually the expenses that derail a retirement. The expenses that create the biggest problems are often the ones that nobody sees coming. Now, we've arrived at what I believe is the most important part of the conversation, because the expenses we've talked about so far, housing, transportation, food, and healthcare, those are the more predictable expenses. It's the unpredictable ones that often have the greatest impact. RMDs, or required minimum distributions, IRMA, the Medicare surcharges, and taxes may take a much bigger bite than anticipated. It seems like every unexpected expense shows up at once. That's why retirement planning isn't simply about creating enough income for your average month. It is about creating enough flexibility for your expensive years. And here's something that I've learned after helping hundreds of families prepare for retirement. Rarely does one large expense ruin someone's retirement. Usually, it's 5 or 6 unexpected expenses spread out over several years individually. None of them seem catastrophic, but collectively, they quietly change everything. So how do you prepare for something that you can't predict? The answer is flexibility. But flexibility doesn't happen by accident. It happens through ongoing evaluation and planning. One of the biggest misconceptions I see that people think about retirement income planning is that it's something you do once, put it in a binder and put it on the shelf, and then simply follow the plan for the next 30 years. That is not how real life works. Life changes. Tax laws change, the markets change, inflation changes, interest rates change, healthcare costs change, and sometimes your own goals change. Maybe 5 years into retirement, you decide you'd rather spend more time traveling. Maybe you move closer to children. Maybe you sell your home. Maybe you lose your spouse. Or maybe you discover that retirement is even better than you imagined, and you decide to do more than you originally planned. A retirement plan should not be carved in stone. It should be a living, breathing plan that evolves as your life evolves. Think about taking a long road trip across the country. You don't look at your GPS before you leave the driveway, and then never look at it again. You check your progress, you adjust for traffic, you reroute around construction. Sometimes you even decide to change the destination. Retirement planning works exactly the same way. Every year, you should pause and ask yourself, are we still on track? Has anything changed? Should our strategy change? Maybe Congress passed a new tax law. Maybe inflation has remained stubbornly high. Maybe the market has created a planning opportunity. Maybe your investments have grown faster than expected. Or maybe your spending has changed. The point is, a great retirement plan isn't one that's created once. It's one that's reviewed, adjusted, and refined year after year. Because staying on course isn't about making one perfect decision. It's about making a series of good decisions over time. There's one more expense we need to talk about: inflation. Inflation never sends you a bill. It never calls ahead. It never asks permission. It simply makes almost everything more expensive year after year. Think back 20 years. How much did groceries cost? Gasoline, a new car, a nice dinner out. Almost everything costs more today than it did back then. And chances are it will cost even more 20 years from now. That's one reason that retirement income planning is so challenging. It's not enough for your retirement income to last. It has to maintain your purchasing power. In other words, your income doesn't just have to survive, it has to keep up. And all of this brings us back to where we started. Traditional retirement planning has always asked the wrong question. Because after everything we've talked about today, housing, transportation, food, healthcare, unexpected expenses, inflation, annual review, and course corrections, I don't think the most important question is how much money have I saved? I think the better question is, can my retirement income support the life I actually want to live? Because those are two very completely different questions, and the answer changes everything. I've often said, everyone can retire, but at what income? I believe that is the question worth answering. In this video here, I show you a case study and I walk through the numbers and the strategies. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the Financial Fast Lane.